Fundamentally, there are 4 different types of media interviews: television, radio, print, and podcasts. They're all as important as one another. Television is very exciting. It can be a little bit more nerve-wracking because it's visual, but it is very impactful. There's no question about that. So I want to talk about news interviews, long-form interviews, and when you're doing an interview live. Let's start off with news. Now, there are very significant differences when you're doing an interview for a news program, and fundamentally, that's what we've spoken about over the journey over the last 4 modules, because we've been aiming toward getting you on a TV news service. Yes, an interview in print. Yes, an interview on radio. And yes, an interview for a podcast. But fundamentally, we've been really aiming toward that television news interview. Let me give you some detail as to the sorts of things you can expect. The first thing you need to understand when you're doing an interview for news is that the reporter is going to want you to talk in short grabs, 10-second grabs, sometimes even less. So that means when you're preparing for your television news interview, you need to think about answers to questions, or more specifically, your messaging being shorter rather than longer. If you talk in 25, 30-second grabs, you'll find that those grabs won't be used on that particular story or during that story whenever it's being broadcast on whatever television station it's being broadcast on, because it's too long. So you need to think of short, punchy answers and short, punchy messaging, because that's what television wants. That's what the reporter will want, and fundamentally that has not really changed over the last 15 or 20 years. Maybe those grabs have got a little bit shorter. Maybe 15, 20 years ago you could have got away with a grab of 15 seconds, but certainly not now. It would be very, very rare. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, that makes it hard, because how do I explain my product or my thought or my business or my brand or what I want to talk about in 10 seconds, 15 seconds? You need to adapt. You simply need to adapt. It might mean that you need to perhaps prepare more messages. You might need to prepare 5 or 6 messages and make sure that you get those across within the interview. And if you get 2 or 3 of those grabs up and they're 10, 15 seconds long, then you have done your job. The issue you have is if you don't adapt and you come up with a whole lot of very long-winded and convoluted answers, you'll find that it is going to be difficult for the reporter to work out exactly what the best grab is, because you haven't been clear and you've extended your interview grabs, and in doing so, it just makes it more difficult for the reporter to go back to work, to look at the interview back and say, yes, that is the best grab, because they're all too long. So you need to make the job of the reporter easier. You need to think about grabs that are 10 and 15 seconds long, or maybe another way to explain this is think of a message 10 to 15 seconds long wrapped around a longer sentence, if that makes sense. Now, I'm just ad-libbing this and I'm not using notes, so let me see if I can come up with an example. Let's say, for example, we'll go back to the veterinarian, and let's say you're talking about the nature of the dog virus that is sweeping another state, for example, and let's say, for example, your 10 to 15 second grab is, this is a very just understand I'm ad-libbing this. This is a very dangerous virus. It must be treated seriously. You must make sure you are alert to it. Let's say that's the grab. You can say that just by saying that only, but you could wrap it around by saying, look, I must admit, I'm not the only one that's concerned about this virus. This virus has been around for a while now, and then switch to your grab within that sentence, if that makes sense, and I hope it does, so that it feels a little bit more natural. But you still need to prepare, and you still need to prepare those shorter grabs, and that is what a reporter will want if they're doing a TV news story involving you. The other thing that you need to be very aware of when you're being interviewed for TV is you need to understand that it's helpful if you help the journalist or the reporter understand which grab is important, and therefore it's important that you repeat your short grabs. You repeat them a number of times during your longer interview. And again, you can do that organically, and we did speak about that in one of the earlier chapters. And it can be as organic as saying, but please let me make this point yet again. This is a very dangerous virus. It mustn't be treated. It must be treated seriously, and we really need to be alert to it. Now, you may have said that 2 or 3 times during your longer form interview or the actual interview itself. But what you're doing is you are making it clear to the reporter that that is an important point and that should be included in the story. Now, most good reporters will know that. They'll pick up on that straight away after you've said it the first time. But if you say it 2 or 3 times and the reporter you're dealing with happens to be a little inexperienced, then that is just helping them along the way. Another thing that you need to be aware of with news interviews, with all interviews, but I'll reiterate this, is to make sure that you stay on message and to not wander. Make sure that you are totally focused and that you get your 4 or 5, 6 messages across. If that's the number that you're working with, get them across as soon as you can during the early stages of the interview, so that again the journalist that you're dealing with will understand which grabs, which 10-second bites, we call them as well, are important. Now, if you're doing a long form interview, now that may be where you're sitting down with a reporter and they're going to speak to you pre-recorded, which means it's not live, and it's going to be an interview for 10 minutes. Well, then the game changes completely because you have more time to explain yourself. So you may well use that 10, 15-second grab I mentioned earlier from the veterinarian, but you may expand on it. You may expand on it, for example, like this. You may say, we need to be very, very careful about this virus. This is a very dangerous virus, and we need to be on top of it. Now, that's the 10-second grab, but because you've got a bit more time, you can then continue on by saying, and it worries me, and this virus really worries me, and I'm sure it worries a lot of people who have dogs, and it's worth worrying about because, as I said earlier, it's a very dangerous virus. But having said that, we are contained. You can see how I'm elaborating. And that means that if you are involved in a long form interview, then you can elaborate on your topic. But again, you need to prepare for that. You need to think very carefully about what you want to talk about. Now, if you get an opportunity to speak with a reporter, and it is a long form interview where it might be 5, 10, 15 minutes. One thing that I think is very important is that you personalise some of your content. You personalise some of your stories. Now, what I mean by that, and again, I'll use the veterinarian example. What I mean by that is it's offering something that people at home will relate to and feel an emotional connection. I'll give you an example. If I were the veterinarian and I was talking about this virus, what I would say is I'd say something like, look, I'm sure there are a lot of people watching now or listening now who have dogs, and I'm sure that they would be extremely concerned about this virus, and I can't imagine how they would feel, for example, if they woke up one morning and their dog was lying at the end of the bed, listless, with a dry nose and with no appetite. Imagine how you would feel if you were that dog owner. Now, that's personalising a story, and what that does is that evokes emotion, and you get an opportunity to do that when you're talking to a journalist in a long-form interview. I'm not saying you couldn't do it with your 15-second grab, but you'd have to be very clever about it. You just get more of an opportunity to do it in the long-form game. live interviews. Now, this is, again, the skills are very similar. You need to prepare. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to certainly not drift off topic. But it is extremely important that you not only don't drift off topic, but it is extremely important that you stay on topic, because this is live. It is going to air live. People are seeing you live. They are sitting in their lounge rooms and they are watching you talk, and they are expecting you to make sense and to keep on topic and to say things that are really, really poignant and really, really important. And to do that, it takes a little more preparation. Again, you can personalize some of your stories. If you are talking to a reporter who is, say, for example, they're back at the TV studio, but you're actually at home, and the television station has organised a camera crew to come out to your home and set up a camera in front of you where you're sitting in the comfort of your home, but you are talking remotely to a reporter or to a TV host, then there are a couple of things that you need to understand. You need to continue to look down the barrel. In other words, look down the camera lens. When you're not talking, be aware that you may still be on camera. So don't do anything silly. Don't pick your nose, for example, which I'm sure you wouldn't do, but don't make funny faces. That's very important. A lot of people forget about that. When the host is asking questions, they relax and their shoulders go down, and they might give a sigh. They might, throw a funny face, whatever it might be, because they don't realise that they are still on camera. Another thing that is important is that prior to your interview, you don't say anything you wouldn't want recorded. So you don't say anything about what happened the night before and that you'd had a couple of drinks and you're a bit hungover. You are totally professional from the point that you meet or talk to the camera crew or the reporter or the person who is interviewing you. In fact, I would go so far as to say that is the case with all three of these interviews: news, long form, and also live. Print interviews are interesting because when you get a call from a print reporter, they may well talk to you over the phone, which can be disarming. In other words, it can be quite relaxing because you're not being recorded live. You may be, they may have a dictaphone that's recording what you're saying, but it can be quite relaxing. Or they may ask you out for a coffee. Let's talk about the coffee. When you turn up, and I've just mentioned this, but when you turn up for your interview, you are professional to that right at that point. Again, you don't give away any information that you don't want recorded, because when you're sitting down with a print reporter, you never quite realise when you're on the record. In other words, when they start the interview, they may sit down and say, well, yeah, thanks for joining us. How long you had the veterinarian clinic? Oh, I've had about 10 years. Gee, it's been a drain the last couple of years. We've been really sort of struggling, blah, blah, blah. You might say something like that. I'm not suggesting you would, but you may say something like that. And as a result of saying that, then the journalist all of a sudden thinks, well, hang on, this is interesting. Maybe that's the angle rather than the positive angle that I was going to look at doing the interview in the first place with you. So there's a sense of being disarmed when you sit down with a print reporter over a coffee or a meal. You feel relaxed and you may say things that you regret. So you need to understand that as soon as you meet that reporter, you are on the record. Again, you need to prepare properly. Think about what you're going to say. This gives you an opportunity, a little bit like the long form interview, to talk a little bit more, to give a bit more information, but don't waste the opportunity. Again, make sure that you prepare, get your key messages organised. Make sure that you get them across as well and articulate them as well as you possibly can. And I know through experience speaking to print reporters, it's nowhere near as as stressful as a radio or a television interview, but as a result of that, sometimes you can drift and you can say things that aren't really relevant to the conversation. But again, a great opportunity for you to promote whatever it is you're promoting. If you're being spoken to over the phone by a print reporter, fundamentally the same applies. Again, don't give away any information you wouldn't want recorded. Make sure that again you are prepared and that you get your messages across. I guess the only difference is you're not having a coffee with them, you're speaking to them. Make sure that you understand when the interview starts, so that that's when you can get into go mode. And also too, even though it's being recorded only for them to then copy the words, be as up as you can, be as enthusiastic as you can. If you're being interviewed by a print reporter, one thing that print reporters really like are visuals, and you can provide those. They'll often ask you for those, and I'm talking about obviously images or charts, those sorts of things. It's worth keeping in mind if you're, again, let's talk about let's talk about the florist shop and the person that owns the florist shop. If you're being interviewed by a print reporter, they are more than likely going to ask you if you've got any photos of the shop, or any good photos of some flowers, or perhaps some photos of those black roses that we spoke about in an earlier module, where you were promoting a black rose as a gift for guys coming in on Valentine's Day who spend over $50 on a bunch of flowers. You may be asked to provide those photos. However, the print reporter may also send out a photographer to your business to take those photos, and they may well do the interview at your store. That also may well happen. Let's talk about radio interviews. Again, some similar traits. News, again, is similar to television news stories. Keep your answers punchy. Quite often you'll find on radio news services that the grabs may be a little bit longer. I don't want to complicate matters here, but quite often you'll find that is the case. But again, it's important that you prepare your answers and your responses, and you get those messages across and those answers across as succinctly and as focused as you possibly can. The interview styles of a radio reporter compared to a television reporter are very, very similar, or a news reporter, I should say, a television news reporter. They're very, very similar. They want the same thing. They want good information. They want good, clear, concise grabs. And so they're very similar. So a radio interview for news is very similar to a television news interview. In studio, I want to spend a little bit of time here. When you get your first opportunity to speak about your product or your brand or your service or your business or your thoughts, whatever it might be, there's going to be opportunities for you to speak to someone in a radio studio. You're going to be talking to a host of a show in a radio studio. Now, quite often, the producer will ring you. The producer of that particular show will ring you and say, look, we'd love to speak to you. Could you come into the studio? Please try and do it if you can. It's a great experience. It's really, really good for you. You'll gain a lot of confidence as a result of it. The style's a little bit different. There are some techniques I want to walk you through, but they're exciting. When you walk into the studio, generally there will be ads playing or commercials playing, because that'll be the best time for the producer to walk you into the studio. The host will be behind the desk. You will be on the other side of the desk generally. You will have headphones, and the producer or the host will shake your hand, ask you to put the headphones on, tell you that we're probably that you guys are probably 2 or 3 minutes away from the start of the interview. And at that point you sit down. And my advice is you sit down and you don't say too much at all. The radio host will probably chat to you, but you've got to remember he or she's been doing that job for years, so they can focus and refocus very, very quickly. You need to make sure that you are focused right from the start. So don't be distracted by that. Again, preparation is similar. In this case, though, if you're in the studio, you're likely to be in that studio for 10, 15 minutes, maybe half an hour. And that's exciting. That means, again, like the long form interview for TV or like the print interview, you get a chance to really tell your story and really embellish it. So you need to think very carefully about that. This is a golden opportunity for you to impress people at home who are listening to you. So you need to know what you're talking about, obviously. You need to think about some personal stories that relate to whatever your issue is that you're talking about, so that, again, what you do is you disarm people at home and you give them the opportunity to go on the ride with you, if you get my drift, rather than just being pretty static and saying this, and yes, I'll answer that question with this. It's an opportunity for you to really promote yourself and your brand and your product and your service and any thoughts you've got on a particular issue. You've got a really good chance to really nut it out and to really explain your thoughts on a particular topic. And given that opportunity, and not a lot of people get the opportunity, you really need to nail it. A couple of tips: always address the host by name. That will relax them. It will make them feel good about things, and it will help the interview. Would you believe? You might think, well, how? Well, it just means that they know that you sort of know what you're doing. You know, you're personable, and you're engaging, and of course that will help the interview, which of course helps those listening because they'll get more out of it. When you go to an ad break, don't say anything silly because the mics may be on. Quite often they accidentally leave the mics on, so please don't say anything during the ad breaks. Don't necessarily think that the mics are off. Now, quite often when you are in a studio, the host will say, well, Mark, thanks very much for coming in and thanks for talking about this virus. I've got a couple of callers. Do you mind taking some calls? I wouldn't say no, but just be aware that that may happen. And be aware that you may get some tricky questions. That's okay. It's not easy to prepare for those because you have no idea what they'll be. You're an expert. I'm sure you'll be able to handle it. Don't be aggressive. Don't be rude. Be sympathetic, and just expect perhaps occasionally someone to ring up and disagree with you. Don't get into an argument. Be gracious. That's very, very important. So radio interviews are really exciting. I really, really love doing radio interviews and being interviewed on radio. Podcasts, and this is, again, so exciting because podcasts, they are a step above. If you get an opportunity to get onto a podcast, it's just PR. It's just an opportunity for you to really talk about your business and not blatantly promote it, but almost blatantly promote it. It really is. You get a chance to really get your message out there, and that's what podcasts are all about. At the same time, you need to still deliver some valuable information. That's still really, really important. That's key. Again, when you're speaking to the host, talk to them and address them by name. Take some notes in with you if you want to. You can do that for the radio interviews as well because people can't see you. That's fine. Just don't read off the notes word for word. Just have bullet points. And generally during podcasts at the end and probably at the start as well, obviously your name is mentioned, your veterinarian clinic's mentioned if we're talking, the veterinarian scenario. And generally at the end it's, John, thanks for joining us. What's the number? What's the phone number of your veterinarian clinic? Where is it? It's a free It's a free plug. It's brilliant. But you start to get a good reputation on podcasts, and you'll be asked to do them all the time. And they're brilliant, and they're really relaxing. Quite often they're done over Zoom. Generally, they're done in a studio. But podcasts are a great way to promote your business. There's no doubt about it. Now, there are a couple of points I want to leave you with. In a very general sense, preparation, I'm going over old ground here, but I think this is important. Preparation is so important. Please don't do an interview sight unsound. It is just silly and it's fraught with danger. You may know your topic brilliantly, but it is just silly. Craft your message or messages. Think carefully about the medium that you're on, whether it be a podcast, whether it be print, whether it be a news interview, long form, or a short form, or a news interview for a television news bulletin, or whether it be on radio, whether it be news, or whether it be being on a radio show where you've got a bit more time. Craft your messages and do them appropriately. Just work with the particular platform that you're working with, and you'll get better at it. There's no doubt about that. I've mentioned this many a time, but repeat your message. Repeat your message. It is so important, and it may sound odd, but if you do it organically, then it will sound normal. I'm going to repeat that. Repeat your message and do it organically. Now, did you see what I did there? I repeated my message, but I did it organically. I just didn't say repeat your message, repeat your message. And again, you'll get better at it as you get more experience. But it's so important. And also to understand that journalists expect you to do that. If you're doing, for example, if you're doing an interview in a studio and let's say you're a financial advisor and right at the start of the interview you say, you're talking about superannuation, for example, and the fact that, you need to be really careful about your super at the moment because of interest rates, let's say, for example. At the start of the interview you may say that. You may say, look, interest rates at the moment, they're a bit dodgy and you really just need to be very aware of what you're doing with your superannuation. Make sure you get professional help. At the end of the interview, you might be talking about something else. So it might be that you're talking about, perhaps handling your own super fund, and you're coming to the end of that thought, and you might go, yes, so handling your own super funds can be very, very, very good. They can be valuable, and as I said earlier, they are a lot of work if you're doing them yourself. So that's very important. But what else is important is what I said right at the start, and that is with interest rates at the moment in a very very fluxed mode. My absolute key point to make here is that you need to be careful about your superannuation. So again, you get back to your original point, but you do it organically. That's the way you do it. And again, you'll get better the more you practice. Anticipating questions. It's similar to crafting your message, but you may craft 4 or 5 messages for your media interview, but it's also important that you think about the other questions that the journalist is going to ask and just prepare answers for those, just so you don't get stuck. That's important as well. You may craft 4 or 5 really good key messages and do that well and get those messages out, and then at the end the journalist might ask you a question that you aren't quite prepared for, but you still know the answer, but you mumble and fumble. I'm not saying that's the end of the world, but you can alleviate that by thinking carefully and putting yourself in the shoes of the journalist and asking yourself, well, if I was a journalist, what would I ask me as the veterinarian or as the florist or as the financial advisor? And then when you do that, you'll think of those questions and then just think carefully about how you'd answer them. They may not be asked, but it's always good to be prepared. Don't say no comment. And I'll give you an example. Someone might say something like, let's say it's an interview that's a bit edgy and you own a company and you've just perhaps laid off 10 people, for example. The media might say, can you guarantee that you won't be laying off more people in the next couple of weeks? Now, if you say no comment, what that means is you're guilty, or at least you're implied to. The implication is you're guilty. And so the reporter will ask some follow-up questions, and in the end you'll get stuck. You need to think carefully about those questions, which is anticipating questions, but in this case, anticipating tricky questions, and you need to think of other answers, apart from no comment. And that's a little bit more complicated. It's a little harder, but again, with practice, you will start to get the knack of that. Now, I don't think that's going to happen too often with the interviews and the types of media coverage that we're talking about with 6 steps to free media publicity. But nonetheless, you still need to be prepared. I've used that word a number of times. You still need to be prepared. Building relationships with reporters. I'm going to talk about that in detail in the next module, but I cannot emphasise enough how important it is that you build relationships with reporters. And the best way to start doing that is when you meet a reporter for an interview. I'm not going to go into too much detail now because I'm doing a complete module on that, but I can't stress how important it is. Being on first name basis, having their email, having their mobile number, them trusting you, you trusting them. Please understand that is really, really important. And finally, learning from others. And what I mean by that is now that, and we're really, really motoring along now. This is the fourth module. The fifth module, as I said, is all about building relationships with reporters and the media. And then the sixth module is the piece de resistance, and it's the one I'm really excited about. I'll be doing that from the Adelaide Entertainment Centre. That's all about getting yourself up on stage and becoming an authority in front of 100 people, 500 people, 5,000 people. That's when things start to rock. That's when your profile starts to really skyrocket. But we'll get to that in Module 6. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because we're 2/3 the way through the entire course, you're starting to get a real feel for what's required. And as a result of that, you can now watch a television news service or listen to the news on radio or listen to an interview with someone on radio, or perhaps listen to a podcast or read an article in the paper, and you will start to notice what people are doing well, and you will start to notice what people are doing poorly. And that is gold. That is gold. It's a little bit like, I present on, I've been presenting on camera for 40 odd years, and I've been a public speaker for almost that long, and I've been a corporate host for that long. But what I do is I watch a lot of YouTube videos and watch people present in front of camera and present in front of large groups of people. And I learn so much. I learn what to do, and I also learn what not to do. And the reason I do that is because I want to improve, and I want you to be able to do that as well. I think that's really, really crucial. And I guess the point I'm making is, now that you have a real feel for how the media works and what the media wants, how the media gets what it wants, how you can utilise the media to your advantage, what makes a news story, how to identify story ideas within your business, how to promote that story through a media release to the media, how to prepare, as you're learning now, how to prepare for a media interview. Now that you've got all of this knowledge, which has been second nature to me, it's been second nature. I mean, I've lived it for 40 years. Now that you've got this knowledge, even though you haven't worked in the business for 40 years like me, you've got it. You understand it. All these things I've been telling you are things that I've learned over 40 years. Now that you're starting to get it, you can start to learn and observe others and take this to a whole new level. You really can. You can learn so much from what others do well, and as I said, you can learn so much by what others do poorly. Your media interview and the way in which you conduct yourself is absolutely key. You must make sure that you're prepared.